$50,000 doesn't go where it used to, and 40 or 50 doesn't
Y'all
go
ready?
at all. That's what you got to class. And then you've got people trying to survive.
Okay, the Brazos County Commissioners Court will meet in a special call session July 19th, 1:30 Brazos County Administration Building, 200 South Texas Avenue, Suite 106. First item is call to order, and the second is presentation and discussion regarding Brazos County's debt deference by Dan Martinez, Winstaton PC, and Dennis Whaley and Jennifer Arndt with PFM Financial Advisors. Dennis, you want to start out?
Well, thank you for having me here today. I'm Dennis Whaley with PFM. We're the financial advisor to the county. And we have a presentation to talk about a possible cash defeasance, a brief discussion on your bond election, and then a page to show where the market is right now. So what is... All right. So what is a cash defeasance?
Could you talk into the microphone, please?
Please.
Is that better?
Get a little
A little
closer.
closer.
Louder. Okay. So what is a cash defeasance? A cash defeasance is taking excess funds in your INS, or another way to say it, your debt service fund, placing them with the paying agent, who is the person who makes the payments of interest and principal on your bonds, and using that money to pay off outstanding bonds, not refunding them like you would a mortgage, but just pay them off. So when you pay them off, there will be no new debt service, and the savings you receive is the difference between what you would have paid had you left those bonds outstanding and what it costs you to defease them now or pay them off now. So these are the bonds that we selected to defease or pay off. Some of the certificates of obligation of 2012 and some of the refunding bonds of 2012. So how did we pick which bonds to defease? We wanted to pick the longest ones we could because those are the ones you'll be making payments on for the longest period of time. So you see on the certificates of obligation, it's the 30s, the 31s, and 32s. And on the refunding bonds, it's the 23, 24, and 25s. The total par amount on those bonds is $5,890,000. So what you see here is if you didn't pay these bonds off, this is your, where it says prior debt service, this is how much debt service you will be paying going forward. And I think one thing I didn't mention that I should have earlier is all of these bonds are callable, which means you can pay them off on September 1 of 2022. So that's when we want to pay them off, because if we pay them off then, we'll have no future payments. And you'll see at the bottom, if you left them outstanding, your payments over time would be $6.77 million. We're going to take $5,990,000 out of the INS fund to pay them off on September 1st, and your savings will be almost $784,000 because you deployed those dollars in the INS fund to pay these bonds off. So that's all I have on the defeasance. So moving forward to the bond election. Questions?
So the defeasance affects FY 22-23 budget. Do you want to go ahead and go through the legal requirements of the defeasance before we talk about the bond election, which would be David? Daniel. Okay, sorry. Or do you want to go ahead and go to the financial part of the bond election and then legal, both sides, both defeasance and bond election? I'm trying to help you keep your thoughts together.
I'm good either way.
Okay.
Well,
Continue on.
What does everybody else think?
Yeah,
let's go with what you got prepared.
Go ahead and talk about the defeasance.
Good afternoon, everybody. Judge, Commissioners, for the record, Dan Martinez with Winston PC, your bond counsel. Always a privilege and honor to be here. As Dennis mentioned, the idea is to kind of pay off some of these bonds early. So what you have before you is a resolution authorizing us to use the debt service funds we have on hand to pay off some of these bonds that he just described on September 1. This resolution you have authorizes that action. It also authorizes ancillary documents. In particular, we got to give notice to the bondholders once you approve, because we have to give them 30-day notice. So as soon as I get that executed, if that's the will of the court, I'll turn that over to the paying agent so they can send out that notice to the bondholders so they're aware. Then there's some other documents that are required by the old orders that authorize those bonds, and those are there for your signature as well. Namely, to kind of give that instruction to the paying agent, hey, FYI, we're going to send you this money, pay off these bonds on X date, and that's kind of the process.
There's no
Yes, sir.
call premium on any of these?
Good question, but no, they're currently callable, as Dennis mentioned. Great question. If anybody has any questions?
I would recommend on the defeasance, that require, okay, so I already certified to the tax office, the appraiser, to the tax assessor collector that we were gonna defease. So it would be better to go ahead and vote on the resolution for defeasance before we go into the bond election discussion, and it could appear as you're voting on that. You're not. Follow?
So I move that we pass the certification for certificate for resolution on the defeasance.
Thank you.
Do you hear a second?
Second.
Okay. Motion made second. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Unanimous.
So
Thank you.
while they're here, we thought that they could also talk about the possible bond election in November.
Okay.
So thank you. So the defeasance work is done. The next thing we're going to talk about is the possibility of a bond election in November. So Katie, Jen, myself, and Dan have done a little preliminary work on scenarios, looking at the issuance of bonds in the future based on a $100 million bond election in November. We will talk about the assumptions.
Dennis?
Yes.
You know, I was on vacation last week. Why is it important? Because the bond election isn't on the agenda, as the lawyers are pointing out to me right now. So what we can do, we've done the resolution, it's been approved. It's a comedy of errors. So now we need to adjourn the special called session and call in the workshop.
Yeah, I got you. Okay.
Okay, the workshop
Thank you,
shouldn't
Bruce.
start
Thank you,
until
Bruce.
2.
Okay, so we've taken the action that was needed to be taken in the special call session. There's none other to be taken now, correct? We've done all we need to do.
Done
in
everything
this.
you'd need to do for the special called session.
Okay. All right, so the next item is to adjourn. We will adjourn the special call
I do
session.
have a question of our team. What have we paid for their services? So what does the defeasance really cost us?
How much you gonna charge us, Dennis?
I mean, we're
We
all
only pay
friends.
by, yes,
We're
we
all
are.
friends.
Well, I mean, it's all
No, I
transparency.
think the number run, and I don't have it in front of me, but I can certainly look it up, had $10,000.
Okay, so we
And then
made
Dan, we
this-
pay also.
That's all I can get.
Yes.
So 10,000 altogether.
all together? Okay. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
Okay, so,
I
Then-
don't think we can call it until 2 o'clock.
Not to 2,
oh, is it as 3? Is it 2?
not to 2.
1:42, okay. Well, we gotta wait a few minutes. We've gotta wait till 2 o'clock to call it, because that's when it's set for, so.
Exactly.
All I can say is trying to have the people for your information as much as we can.
send on down to
Pardon me?
Nina.
Okay,
And
we're
so,
ready.
but,
I'll hold on. But thanks.
yeah.
Okay. Y'all ready? Y'all got the recorder on? Ready? The Brazos County Commissioner will meet in a workshop session. It's July 19th, 2 p.m., County Administration Building, 200 South Texas Avenue, Suite 106. First item is called to order. And we're gonna skip down to number 4. We can come back to number 4 after we go through the others, but we'll do the open discussion of 22-23 proposed budget first, and we'll start with the bond.
I'm glad you got there because I didn't see on the agenda how we were gonna get to this spot. Good call.
This is all.
I got you. No, hey, moved away. I mean, way beyond what I was, yeah, this is great.
Good afternoon, Judge. Again, Commissioners, Dan Martinez for the record with Winsett PC, your bond counsel. I'm here to visit with you guys briefly for this workshop to kind of give you some thoughts and background on potentially calling a road bond election that you guys may be considering for this fall. I know you've had some discussions in the past, and we visited as well. But I think one of the key takeaways with respect to if you do consider putting a measure out there this fall, we have a timeline. There's certain timing deadlines that we have to hit. The most important one, folks, is the last day per law is to call the election for the November election date is August 22nd. And I think they handed you guys out a timeline of key dates, if you will, kind of generally what we need to hit with respect to certain publications that have to take place, postings on your website, postings, different parts of the, where you conduct the election, things like that. And so that's my job to work with staff to make sure we check those boxes, et cetera. But again, before you, if you are considering a measure for November, our deadline to call an election and authorize an election order would be August 22nd of this year.
And where does our regular Tuesday meeting fall that's closest to the 22nd, the 17th or something like that?
16th or 17th?
It'd be
Where's our
That's
regular
16th.
commissioners court
16th.
meeting
I think
fall?
the 16th.
That's correct.
16th or 17th?
16th.
Okay, so unless we want to call a special meeting, my guess would be is the target for us might be the 16th.
Yeah, if we need to, we can do that.
Okay.
Mhm. And we would need to kind of have a discussion of what you folks will be looking at in terms of the election. I did also, maybe you received copies of sample ballots that we've seen when counties do kind of call these elections, general broad language, if you will, that's kind of covers a lot of the whole projects that you might consider. In your packet, there's a first example where you're concentrating solely on maybe the highway system type projects, and then there's another sample where it's maybe more focused on the local type roads, if you will, and those types of bridges. There's a couple sample ballots you can take a look at that kind of give you some ideas of where you might want to go. Or the other option is just lumping it all into one proposition. So it gives you some flexibility. It's whatever you guys might consider and what you might think best. If you have a measure separate, those items might not be successful, whereas the second items might, depending on how you guys want to go about it. But there's some samples there for your review and kind of, if you have any questions, I can answer them. But again, it's how you guys want to take that approach. I will say this, a few sessions ago, it's probably been about at least 6 years now maybe, there is a provision when we issue debt sometimes, and I think Dennis mentioned, we have some certain types of obligations that we've issued before for the county called certificates of obligation. Certificates of obligation are payable from tax or revenues, and typically they're payable from tax. And the beauty of COs is you don't have to call an election to be able to pledge that tax to pay that debt. And so typically you do, like we're talking about here, we have to mention or authorize a tax to pay these road bonds that we're talking about. With a CO, you don't have to call an election. You just pass an order of the county. We've done that before. In that mechanism, you have to put a notice in the paper, which that's our first step. We usually put a notice in the paper, and it allows the community to know what your project's going to do, but also that notice has to run for 45 days before we can actually approve the certificates, right? And the purpose of that is to give the public notice, because they have the opportunity to petition if they don't want you to issue that debt, for example. So that's kind of the balance of not having an election, whereas you give them notice and they can petition, you have to call an election. There was a law passed that now if you have a bond election for a particular project and it fails, you have a bond election and it fails, you cannot use the CO process for that project for 3 years. And I think Katie shared that with you before as well, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
House Bill 1378.
Yeah. Terrible. So
They
it's
kind of slipped in the door there in 2000, what was that, 13?
yeah, it's been a while. It's been a while. I was close. I said it 10 years. So just to bring that to your attention as well, as you consider this measure, because that's something you'll have to deal with potentially in the event the measure has any issues.
When we, which date on the list is where we have to decide on the proposition?
Our last day to call the election is the 22nd. So
And that's when we have to have the proposition language?
yes, we'll have an election order. The election order will have the actual proposition in it.
Okay.
And the actual ballot language, and that's what I incorporate in your samples that you have. It's the actual proposition, then you have the shorter ballot itself, and those are just samples for your consideration. There's a lot of financial information that has to be presented in that election order, and I'll work with Dennis and Katie to make sure we have that, but it's required by law. As I mentioned also, Commissioner Aldrich mentioned a lot of different statutes have been passed over time. And in the vein of transparency, there's a lot of financial information that's required now in bond orders. We have to put that on your website as well. You typically will publish notice anyway, but we do that process as well. You post the order at the election sites, things of that nature. In the vein of, again, as I mentioned, transparency.
When does the financial information due?
Everything will be due, and it has to be presented in the order. It's part of the order. It's not a whole lot. It's Dennis will knock that out.
You're not going on vacation. Okay.
It's not an absolutely heavy lift. He's got the based on the
We have to
information he's
produce an
got.
act for-
Yeah.
So
So
we'll have to have everything in order by the 16th?
we can put it on the agenda, and then
Okay.
whenever you guys
Whether we're gonna
have
But
your
the 22nd.
due dates for your
Is the
documentation,
next one.
I'll hit that deadline, whatever you require. If we need to modify it from that to the point of the meeting, we have that capability as well. Just so long as we're in the agenda.
We got a meeting
It's the
the 28th coming up with our road consultant. Is that correct?
July?
Yeah,
July 28th.
July 28th.
So, enough time?
And I don't know if before you get into this, or you want to wait to get into this, with the two scenarios, I guess the question I had is do we have to list in the referendum which of the two scenarios to use, because and schedule out when?
No.
Okay.
So all you have to do is
depending upon when we have the ability to do the project and have the money available in order to do that, it's a function of, you've just given us two scenarios to look at here,
Yeah.
but it still gives us the flexibility within
Yeah.
the total amount of the referendum to issue
Right.
according to whatever schedule we want to do,
Absolutely.
dependent upon
Right.
project.
Great question.
And project readiness, as well as what we want to do relative to costs for the project.
Absolutely.
And-
Yeah,
and
the
interest
election-
rate that's out there.
The election
I mean,
just sets the
Rates
max.
go up,
We can
we're
wait
not getting as
since-
much for what we're borrowing, but
Yeah.
costs go up, we're not getting as much.
And that's always an analysis, and Dennis usually kind of discusses that with you. But great questions, Commissioner. It's a function of, okay, what's the market looking at that time frame versus the cost risk. Your costs are going up, if you will. But really the bond election gives you the authority to go issue this debt and levy a tax for that purpose. And so when you're ready is when you're ready. And so that election order is ripe in terms of giving you authority to issue bonds 30 days after the contest period has run. I'm sorry, after canvassing. Sorry, after canvassing.
It's
So.
okay, Dan.
So anyway, you wait a little while, and then you'll when of course working with Dennis and his team, to kind of tell us when this is a good time to hit the market, if you will, and maximize, as you mentioned, Commissioner, the amount we can issue for those bonds. But those are just samples. Again, it's not set in stone. The last sample is just one shot. One type of proposition in total. So, it's just however you guys think about it. Sometimes you don't want to confuse the voters, maybe, and just go with one proposition. I think we can talk to your consultant as well, and he might have some thoughts on other entities he's worked with. You've seen cities go out with propositions, and now they're forcing us to kind of break them out even more in terms of the propositions. Right. And so typically you'll have a street and road type of proposition, and they've dealt with the same issue as you will, if you will. So, but again, the idea is to have everything ready so we can have it final by the 22nd to approve an order.
So if we adopted a proposition for the election order that didn't that listed a type of road but not a specific road, and it failed, we couldn't do a certificate of obligation for a specific road within 3 years, or we couldn't do one for a type of road within 3 years. Isn't that crazy?
So it's the way we typically write them for counties. You have so many broad type of roads, so it's the general broad language. So you're kind of all in because you want to have the flexibility to do countywide projects, if you will. So in the case of the city, it's great. Sometimes they do specify the road to kind of, okay, if this fails, we might still have the option to do this. And so I've seen it.
True. Does it work?
Yeah, it works. I've done it before, but it's.
But if you do broad and then try to go specific, not so much.
I haven't had that scenario, but
because it's only 6-year-old.
Yeah, statute.
Law,
Yeah,
right?
so I haven't had that scenario myself, but I've definitely run it by the AG and the Secretary of State to confirm if we want to try and do that. But again, what I've seen is typical. Those are the last 2 road bond elections out there, Commissioner, for example, and so that's kind of the approach they did. One was Collin County, and the other one was forgot the.
Rockwell?
No, they did one too, but it was another one. The first one was Collin County, and the other one was I forgot. I'll find it.
Gotta be north somewhere.
Yeah, it was north.
Denton.
Yeah, it was in there. Pardon?
Denton?
It was in that area. It wasn't Denton County itself, but there's another one out that way. It starts with a T.
Tarrant.
Tarrant County. Thank you.
How could you forget Fourth Ward?
So that's my piece, and unless you have any other questions, I think Dennis may want to
So-
discuss some of the other stuff.
We have a limited time to ask questions. I know I'm being pushy, but as we talked about, you have to decide something by August 22nd.
Now, our current INS debt service rate is just about 5 cents per 100, correct?
That's correct.
Yes.
Okay.
And Dennis is here. The rest of his presentation is just some possibilities, if it passes, how you might want to stagger or not stagger, or just some information, which is back up on the screen.
So as Commissioner Aldrich mentioned, we ran 2 scenarios. You're not married to either one of them. It was just 2 scenarios. Your bond election, we assumed, was for $100 million. The first scenario is to issue $20 million in bonds each year from 2023 to 2027. Using the assumptions we'll show you on the next page, the interest and sinking fund rate would max out at 5.03 cents. We did a second scenario, which was to issue $40 million in bonds in 23 and 24, and then the final $20 million in 25. And that gave us a maximum interest and sinking fund rate of 5.06. So under that first scenario, which was 20 million for 5 years in a row, we assumed no growth in '23 because we already had an assessed value to work with. And then we assumed a 5% assessed value growth rate in '24 and 2% thereafter. We assumed a AA interest rate scale
Which is our current.
for GL bonds, which is what you're rated. We assumed a level debt service structure, which is very conservative. And
The current tax.
there's your current tax rate,
1.2.
5.1243 cents. The left axis shows your existing debt service, and then layers on the 5 bond sales. And then the right axis will show you what your assumed tax rate would be with the assumptions we made. Once again, you really don't get much over 5 cents. The second scenario was same assumptions, except you're now going to issue 40, 40, and 20 over the next 3 years. The tax rate maxes out at, what did we say, 5.06%. And then these are the existing bonds in blue, and then the 3 issues that would be coming on board if you did all of those. Once again, just like Commissioner Aldrich mentioned, that we made assumptions. Assessed value goes up faster, and interest rates, stay where they are now. Might be able to do more. AV doesn't go up as fast, or like you say, rates skyrocket, or inflation hits us on the construction side. We might have to rethink it, the timing of things. But this is just 2 ideas here. And then just briefly, kind of where's the market now and where have we been? The blue line is where interest rates from 1 year to 30 years are for AAA GO debt. 1 week ago is the line which is dotted just barely above it. And then you'll notice 1 month ago is the top dashed line, and 1 year ago is the bottom dashed line. So rates, I know you've seen over the last 6 months, have gone up significantly. We've come off our peaks here recently, but much higher than we saw
A year ago.
a year ago. The bottom one is, I guess, to make us all feel a little bit better. The bar is the range of interest rates over the last 10 years for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years as you go out to the right, and then what the range has been over the last 10 years for 30-year bonds. And a year ago, rates were that bottom line, which are, we'll call it rock bottom. That was as low as interest rates have pretty much been in this cycle. And then it shows where rates are today, and we've moved up quite a bit. But
1.5%.
still not near as high as rates have been over the last 10 years, if that makes anybody feel any better. But rates have moved up significantly with inflation and many other things going on in the world. And that's the prepared presentation. Glad to answer any questions.
What's typically the spread between a general obligation or a certificate of obligation at a AA?
Same.
Same.
Both is property tax pledge, so you're same.
Same amount of risk.
Same amount of risk to an investor.
Okay. Because they're still backed by the full faith and credit in the
Yes, sir.
ad valorem.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Of the issuer. the length of the issues on your two scenarios, those were assuming a issue that would be a 10-year or a...
No, I think these were 25-year. I think we went out 25 years.
25-year amortization?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Which is changeable.
Yes, you can do 20,
It's just
30,
an-
you
it's
can do 25.
Just kind of ideas based on,
Yeah.
move this up, that'll go down, that down, up, you know. Creating a box.
Yeah. Well, the opportunity to defease or call stuff based on what happens with our assessed valuation, that's always a possibility as well.
If for some reason you did have excess funds in your INS fund, yes, you could
Yeah.
defease debt. Yes, sir.
Well, I'm assuming, okay, so we would keep the,
That's
so,
it.
so the debt service rate through the issuance in either scenario, the issuance of all of the $100 million of new debt would still keep us below what our current our INS tax rate is now.
The assumption was 0.5.
If
With-
all the
with
assumptions
the assumptions.
fall into place, yes. And each of these bond issues that you would be doing going forward will have a 10-year par call.
Okay.
So as time passes and the bonds roll down the yield curve, you'll have the opportunity to refund them for debt service savings.
Super.
And the cost would be associated with the number of issuances we decide to do. So like if we are authorized 100 and we do it in 100 different issuances, the fees will be more than if we do it in 2. Just so we're clear. I think you do that, but.
Yeah, I think I would be against the shotgun approach a little bit more. Let's take a couple of rifle shots.
Mhm.
Okay, thanks.
If I may, Judge, I have one more comment that I felt to address earlier. Typically, or the rules are ethically, you guys can advocate or promote or talk about the election as you please until we call the election.
Right.
So you can advocate up to that point. Once we call the election, it's just the facts. You can just present factual information. We cannot take your First Amendment rights, and speak on your behalf. You can talk on your own personal behalf, but you cannot talk on behalf of the court or your official capacity. So I just want to remind you guys that I think we had a discussion about that way in the past with Bruce as well. But typically that's very simple rule, just the facts after you call. Thank you.
All right. Thank y'all for coming in and sharing. That's what we need.
So,
All right.
yeah. And I think we have some signed stuff for you.
So we're ready to go back up to number 2, I guess, now. We'll go back up to number 2, presentation discussion regarding investments by Christian Villarreal with County Treasurer's Office.
Yes, I gave them a printout. I sent one to y'all. Can I pull it up?
No. Thank you. Get over time. David, Dan, whatever I want to call you.
Afternoon, Judge and Commissioners. Oh, yes, sorry. I'm Christian Miller. I'm with the Treasurer's Office, for the record. I'm going to go over kind of where investments are currently and then what our request is for budget. Currently, as y'all been hearing, the interest rates are going up. As of right now, the Fed fund rate is at a 1.5% to 1.75%. There is a meeting in about a week, and the expectation is that there's going to be another bump of 50 basis points to 100 basis points, with mostly people believing it's going to be about 75 basis points. So that's going to bring that rate up to the target range of 2.25% to 2.5%. Again, rates are going up, and they're going up very quickly. Since March up to today, since March, we've had 25 basis points increase, a 50 basis point increase, and then last month a 75 basis point increase. That being said, they're also expecting that the rate hike in July won't be the last for the year, that they will continue to push upwards. Currently, the local government investment pool rates, if you're in the government pools, they're about 1.18%, and the prime pools are at 1.6%. The prime pools are allowed to invest in commercial paper, which gives that bump a little bit more because there's a little bit more spread compared to the T-bills. The LGIPs tend to be able to react to the bumps a little bit quicker. We treat them like cash because they're liquid as cash. That as if we wanted to move something out today, as long as we make a withdrawal by 3 p.m., that money is back in our depository, so we can treat them as cash if we want to have money out. And then if we need to make payments, we can always move money back in fairly quickly. The local government investment pools, they also already charge a set fee that's between about 9 basis points to 12 basis points. We don't actually see the fee because as they give us the interest, the yield, it's already worked into the yield for the daily dividend. So we don't actually see a fee, but there is a fee that is based when we put money into local government investment pools. As of the end of June, we had, and we're still trying to finish up the quarterly reporting for the investments. As of the end of June, we had about 156 million out in local government investment pools, and we had about 126 million in the depository. The money in the depository is not all investable funds by statute. Some of them cannot be invested, but that's just a reference for what we are looking at right now with how much money we actually have. Again, some with the 156 million being in investment pools and are allowed to be invested. Interest earned for the quarter was that
So y'all moved quite a bit more money over there from what we approved today on your May treasurer's report then?
correct. So the 22 million that came in June for ARPA, we moved straight out to Texas class.
Okay.
So we should have been at about 134 at the end of May. The end of the quarter as of June, we were looking that we earned, again, this is without the quarterly being done at this point, but about 257,000 for the quarter. Again, like I said, the interest rates are going up and they're going up fairly quickly. As of today, 18 days into the month, we are at 113,000 just for 18 days. Again, that 257,000 is based on a quarter. With all that being said, the request that we're having is going to be assistance in investing with a portfolio manager. The reason we're going this route, for one, is we are running out of man hours with Oracle and getting everything done with that. We're not looking for necessarily a long-term solution. This is more on the short term that we're looking at for the time being. Again, help with that. With the portfolio manager, the reason we're asking for it is because we're looking at extending out the maturities of our investments. Right now, our maturity is a day because, again, we are in the depository and we're in local government investment pools. With the portfolio manager, some of the pros that we get from it is an access to their broker list. Normally, for most counties like our size, they'd have 3 to 5 people probably on their broker list. Obviously, a portfolio manager has access and the ability to communicate with more, so they may have about 15 to 20. Portfolio manager also will give assistance in the investment policy, so any updates that the Texas legislator has to the PFIA, anything of that nature, they would be able to assist us in that. With us going out and investing in securities, we would also have our quarterly reporting be a lot more extensive than it is today. Again, today we're reporting on our depository and local government investment pools. It's straightforward as in we don't have to mark things to market with them. It's whereas in, again, securities going after treasuries, agencies, we would have to mark to market. It also helps on the, when I say quarterly reporting, it also helps in yearly reporting at the end of the year. What auditors are doing, CAFR and whatnot, having those marked to market. Also with entries that we would be having to make into the GL with purchases of securities, we would have assistance in that nature. In the grand scheme of things, the biggest thing that we are wanting to do is to diversify that county portfolio. It needs to be done, and we understand it needs to be done, but at this time, again, we're running out of man hours in order to do that, and to do it properly. Again, bringing in a portfolio manager, you bring in the expertise, you bring in time, with, again, under the assumption that this isn't a long-term solution, this is going to be a short-term solution to make sure that it is done. Hopefully, as we get more control over Oracle and we gain those hours back, that we can work this back into in-house instead of going after a portfolio manager outside of the county. With that being said, the portfolio managers that we've seen and heard from, it's going to be either a fixed fee or a variable fee. When I say variable fee, I mean they would charge based on the assets under management under them. So with the $156 million that we have in LGIPs, if we moved $75 million out and we laddered that out with a portfolio manager, if it was at 5%, if it was at 5 basis points, 0.05% for $75 million, you would look at $37,500 annually as the fee overall. Correct. And so I had a projection for what it could be, but with how volatile it is right now and how fast things are moving,
Oh, you don't want to take a guess?
I have a guess.
He had $4 million.
I have a guess.
This was proposed
But-
like $4 million. I'm like,
I guess.
But
Yeah.
it's, again, the point of diversifying the portfolio isn't necessarily always going after earning the most interest. It's going to earn you more interest, but it's going to extend to make sure that as things happen with the market, you're not dipping and then going back up and dipping and going back up. You control over a longer portion that you're going to be gaining interest, as I know Commissioner Aldridge definitely knows.
It's a strange world. Right.
That's what I have. Do y'all have any questions for me on any of that?
We did have to renegotiate our depository rate with our depository.
Correct.
Agreement. What did we go down? What's the floor on that now?
The floor is the floor. We went down to 0.03%. We are at 0.05 now, but they are moving very slow compared to what we've seen with other depositories, which is the reason that we moved a lot more out.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, because we had them over the barrel before
Yes.
we renegotiated things.
Correct.
Okay.
And we will be going out for RFP next year.
Okay.
So one of the considerations, sorry, it's a little implicit, is that if we wanted to go to a portfolio manager, obviously there's a cost up front, which we have to budget, not up front necessarily, but there's a cost that we have to budget. And so that's how that came into this discussion. And then, of course, possible revenues. But we don't want to, the concern is trying to do a portfolio manager and go out for our bank depository in the same fiscal year. So we would, if we want to do it, we want to do it this year, not next year.
Is this what is the investment committee that we have? What's their thoughts or recommendations on doing this?
That's the other part, is that depending on what the conversation here is, we have to get with the investment committee to discuss everything.
Okay.
But since it's budget season, obviously going on right now, we wanted to
Personally,
get ahead.
I think this is something that incrementally we can work with some professionals that add revenue
Correct.
during a period of time. I mean, particularly when you look at the 1 year, the 1 year's more than twice the government pool.
Correct.
Almost twice the prime pools.
Correct.
And I understand that they have to ramp up as their maturities go.
Correct.
And then
Yes.
on the back end,
They will catch up.
on the back
but-
end, they'll stay higher longer if rates
Correct.
are declining. But that's something that your investment manager should give you ideas and guidance on as far as that goes.
Correct.
Is this when to, what is it? Security, liquidity, and yield. Yield's the third one. But then I
Correct.
think there's a lot of room in here, yield-wise, for us to make up the difference.
And still safe investments. I mean,
No
completely
question.
with the
No
U.S.
question.
Treasuries, you're obviously
If you had told me that a 1-year treasury was going to be paying, well, it got up to 3 1/4. 3 1/4, I would have.
Correct. Yeah.
And it may depend upon whatever the Fed does on the short end of the curve.
correct.
It could be even higher.
Correct.
But during the meantime, those are some rates that we can sure take advantage of beyond this. And I understand the mark-to-the-market reporting and all that stuff, and the requirements that puts on the treasurer's office to be able to do all of that. But that being provided as a part of the package of investment advisory that's
Mhm.
given, to where they'll record and mark to the market all these types of things. I think that, working with our investment committee and with you guys in the treasurer's office, this is a go for it in my book.
Correct.
So Christian, I know what you originally told me, but I know that, or told us,
Mhm.
but I know that some things have changed since then. Do you
Mhm.
have an estimated budget you would want to be put in contract services?
So that's where I said the 75 million. That's more doable than, again, we went really high end when we first talked to y'all just because we were just dipping our toes. I would say it's not going over 50. If
You know,
you
I
had
put
the number,
75 is in the
yeah,
operating budget
correct,
right now.
Correct.
Proposed, not proposed, requested. Although he requested 80, I cut it. So there's 75,000 in the treasurer's office, requested budget
Add 3 more zeros. You said
For the
75,000.
for the consultant to pay their
For the
fee.
expense side.
Okay.
Expense side.
Okay.
Expense side, yeah. Revenues, I haven't put anything in because I've been scared.
Gotcha.
And I still don't know where I'll land
Okay,
on
but that's
that,
so far on what we're planning on for the budget, the unreserved, unrestricted fund balance is still going to be north of 60 million.
Hope so.
Okay.
As we get closer, the less I'm willing to, because you'll remember
Right.
what I could have
Right.
said.
And well, I mean, if that's a constant balance.
Yes.
That a investment management, cash management group
Yes,
can
can
work
play
with,
with, yeah.
then, yeah, this is incremental return that makes a whole lot of sense to me.
Correct.
So what we could do is, like I said, I already put 75 in the requested budget.
Okay.
way back when, a month or two ago. We could lower it to 50 and then see what happens as far as investment income, and if it catches up, or if it meets $50,000 worth of expectations, then we can increase that budget as we increase the investment.
So you're really talking about going with a fixed fee as opposed to a variable fee?
Just
oriented
something to
person?
start with. Just something.
That I'm not
If they don't have
positive
the
with.
budget, they can't even do anything.
Right.
So,
Okay, so what we need to do is budget for you to be able to have the flexibility to be able to pick between fixed fee and variable fee based on the RFPs that you get in.
Correct.
yes.
So what do we need to plug in? You figure 50?
That's what he's
Do
asked
50.
for. If we can start with 50, is that okay? Okay.
Number
I
one,
think
I don't
it'll
know
pay
that we'll,
off.
number one, I don't know that we'll have to spend that.
Correct.
Right.
Number two is if anybody we hire can't increase our incremental returns by more than 50K,
Correct.
we don't need to be hiring
Agreed. Completely.
I think it'll pay off.
on the type of balances we're